Oh, here we go. Okay. So here's a few key points that I've assembled around what are values. Again, these are a set of descriptors. They're mental constructs around the worth or importance of people, places, things, etc. They're emotionally fused. They give meaning to our lives when they're understood, when they're conscious and embraced. They're derived from our worldviews, and I'll talk to you momentarily about worldviews. We won't be covering that theme today, but it's an important piece for you to understand as kind of background. And finally, they provide us with a deep sense of purpose, expressed in through our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our actions. So I mentioned a moment ago that the values are embedded within worldviews. Worldviews are basically the assumptions or beliefs, or I prefer to use the word the lenses. Like right now I'm speaking to you and I'm looking through my reading glasses, and generally within a few seconds or less of putting them on, I forget I'm looking through them. And so I'm looking through essentially what is a distortion. It's a 1.5 diopter magnification, which is a distortion, but it has a practical use. So our worldviews are the lenses through which we look at life, and generally we're unaware of them. One of the things that can allow us to become aware of our worldviews are often like very powerful transformational personal events that can happen through serious illness, or through right now what we're not directly experienced but indirectly experiencing war, through psychedelics basically, which has been an exploration of mine for many years going back to the early 60s. And it's our worldviews, and they're, without going into detail now, just let me say there are like 7 major worldviews, and each of these worldviews has embedded within them a set of values that are derived from them. At another point, we might consider offering a seminar or webinar on worldviews. It's a very interesting and important topic. But for the moment, the takeaway here is to understand that the values we have are derived from worldviews and lead to our choices. For most people, values are unconscious. They're unconscious motivators. And what I've discovered over a lot of years, that a key characteristic of what I call successful people, of families or organizations, are that their values are conscious motivators. And when I say the word successful, what I mean by that is a successful life. If you look at the etymology of the word success, it actually means one step after another. So in the kind of classic, Crumb cartoon, keep on trucking, so to speak, was that image. So you keep on moving, and that in a way leads to the potential of success. And I view this through a kind of a double or triple bottom line view, rather than only like a financial view or a view around status or power. So success really has to be understood in a much broader way. And I believe, for example, in last month's session that Dan ran, we were looking at success and the parameters of success through the lens of different professions and so on. And when you take a little deeper dive into that, you realize that success cannot only be measured, should not only be measured by the traditional kind of criteria of finance or power. So making values conscious, intentional, and actionable is what this work is about. Now, if we take a little step further, one of the things I emphasize in my work is the importance of identifying our actual values. I spent a lot of years in a variety of different environments, in organizations, corporations, nonprofits, working with individuals. And what I found over a lot of years, and which actually led to my work, was an understanding that it was derived from those experiences, that most of the time when people are talking about values, particularly, let's say, in organizational settings, but really across the board, they're often talking about values they would like to have, or they avow or would like to have, or are deemed politically correct in that particular environment. or what I call sometimes like hand-me-down values from our culture, our family, and they're not necessarily our own. So if we look through this lens, for example, I consider, from the perspective I'm speaking now, avowed values are sort of like dreams. In contrast, I look at actual values are the reality. So the actual reality are the value. When I say actual values, what I'm talking about here are values that are empirically derived through a methodology that I'm going to share with you now, and which you've experienced actually in doing the KVI. So what's needed here, in my opinion, and what I believe, what I can bring to the table, including my colleagues in this work, who are in a number of different countries, but particularly based on my my major part here in Australia, is what we emphasize is the importance of having a robust theoretical structure behind our work, to having good research, and to have a explicit methodology and a set of practices. So these are the attributes, if you will, of what I consider to be like a well-formed approach. So for example, and I'm not going to linger on this, we have about 30,000 AVI reports in our database, or KVI reports in our database. And they go back for like about almost 25 or 30 years, actually. And what we're able to do is actually plot the changes in values that people report during different times. For example, right now, what you're looking at here on this screen is the data from COVID-19 and how that's impacted, for example, two values: health and well-being and financial security. And what we've seen is particularly a very strong uptake in 2021. In late 20 and 2021, particularly, with placing these dates into the relational database and extracting this data, we've seen a very strong increase in the values of health and well-being and the values of financial security. So this parallels our intuitive and actual experience in day-to-day life, what we see in our societies, the multiple societies. This is an interesting data point to see how, for example, having this background, this research, and having this methodology in our database can be used, for example, to illustrate how significant cultural, social, environmental, and economic events can impact us. So let's go into some of the values reports. Now, I'm assuming that all of you have done your KVI. So, you're familiar, for example, with your top 10 values. By the way, these are my top 10 values. And I'm not going to laundry list them now, but the blue colors relate to what we call developmental values. These are values that are associated with learning and transformation and growth and change. And the green color are values that are relational, that have to do with things like emotional intelligence and our relationship to in intimate relationships, in small groups, in larger groups, in organizations, and even to some larger kind of themes that can be viewed through this lens of how we relate to these individuals or groups or ideas. The yellow or orange color are what we call control values that have to do with, I want to say, more kind of, although this is getting a little bit outdated, but let me use it anyway, more of a sort of like a left brain orientation that has to do with analysis, that has to do with planning, that has to do with structure, risk mitigation, prediction. These are these are values that help us in a very concrete way function in daily life. So this is, for example, for each of you in your top 10 values, you'll probably see a distribution similar to what we're seeing here, or your own version of that. I don't know, I can't tell at the moment, but basically, generally the top 10 values are the ones, within the, that you've selected through the prioritization process in the assessment. You've also received, for example, this report called the CRD, Control Relational Development. This is the same thing as, it's just graphically displayed a little bit differently with a few additional values that relate to these three categories. So for example, my primary control value is design pattern order, which is a kind of pattern capacity for pattern recognition. This has been a really, in my experience, a lifelong value. I identify having had this very early in my life, the ability to kind of grok data or grok people and be able to elicit a form, a structure, a pattern that I can recognize, that I can use. Generally hypothetically, for example, if I'm working with somebody in a coaching situation, I can use that in order to help me draw some inference and ask some questions. My relational values, 33% of my values are relational. And my strongest suit here at this stage of my life are developmental values. It's interesting, even at the age of 85, my developmental values are still a strong suit. So they reflect still, even at this age, a desire to learn, to grow, to transform. So this has been a strong suit of mine most of my life, and I'm happy to say it's still the case. Now, each of you has this report as well as this third report, the foundation, focus, and vision values. And this basically illustrates values here at the bottom of the tree, the root system, the values that are really that come from my family of origin, that are long-term values that I learned early on in life. They don't tend to change very much unless there is a powerful transformation. Often people, and I use the example of a near-death experience or a psychedelic experience, which can transform a foundational set of values. People often report coming back from these experiences that they look the same, but they're really different. There's been an extraordinary value shift in the foundation. So these are a two-edged sword. They can provide a sense of identity, but also when these values are challenged. For example, when design pattern order, which is my foundational value, is challenged. If I'm having difficulty grokking a pattern, what I've learned to do is not to collapse, not to contract, but I've learned through breathing, through meditation, through stepping away, through taking a walk, or somehow to separate myself temporarily from that particular dilemma, to come back in with fresh eyes. So that is my solution, if you will, to working with a contraction in the foundation. Because if that happens, if it's not addressed, it steals a lot of energy from my ability to work with my focus or vision values. And we'll be going over more of these details in the second breakout today. We'll be working very explicitly with this set of this particular module. Now, I wanted to show you just quickly what your group, this is based on a group of about 21 or 22 responses of all of you, not all of you, because some of you were a little bit late to the game here in terms of taking the AVI, maybe 2 or 3 of you, but this represents, I think, 21 responses. And these are the profile of your group. And it's interesting that transformative communication is at the top of the list. That doesn't mean that at the bottom of the list, wonder, curiosity, nature is unimportant. They're all important. I tend to view these sort of like as a gestalt. But it's interesting that transformation communication is #1, and being self, which is the highest level of congruence, is the second highest, and empathy is the third. By the way, you'll be receiving, if you want, a copy of this PowerPoint in a PDF form, so you can look at this at your own leisure later on. But this is very interesting with respect. If you were actually a longstanding team inside an organization, we would use this group report as a way of looking at different initiatives, different activities, different processes we're undertaking, whether it's hiring, firing, recruiting, marketing, new product development, financing, whatever particular aspect of our organizational effort we were undergoing, we would, if we're really looking at being a values-based organization, we would use this data to inform our decisions. It's a whole other topic we could talk about. And this is the CRD version of the same data. And you can see here that for this group, 43% of our values are developmental, 40% are relational, and 17% are control values. And finally, this is the foundation focus vision version. You can see here the vision values here. The vision values are those that lead us into the future, that kind of are a magnetic north, or what we call from a kind of chaos theory model, a strange attractor that is magnetizing, leading us into the future. And that is transformative communication. And that can be understood or described as a deep interest in communicating transformative insights or ideas. So it's very interesting. That should be at the top of the list for this group. I consider this, given my knowledge of Black Lab, for example, that this is a very high value for Black Lab. And it's just interesting that this is the top value for this group of 21 people today, or 23 people today. So as we move further into to well-being, there's some key points here about moment-to-moment mindful attention, self-awareness and presence, knowing our values and worldview. I'm not going to read the list, but basically here are some key points from my perspective that we need to look at. By the way, this was the model that Dan graciously introduced us to in our last session. These 5 dimensions of well-being. And what I've done is I've taken the values work and I've mapped those 5 dimensions with the relevant values of the 64, how they map onto these 5 dimensions. So this is again a whole other topic we could look at and explore in more depth in terms of how we, moving forward, how we can integrate the values work with some leading edge research and ideas in positive psychology. I'm always very interested in mapping the values work to a number of different kind of applications. So as we move now into the practical work today, this particular diagram or graphic, purposeful capability, is very important. Purpose, from the perspective I'm speaking, needs to be understood as a values-driven rationale for living and serving. So from my perspective, you can't have purpose without understanding the values that populate and drive it. Will here has to do with life force energy, or what we call in the Chinese medicine or martial arts, Qi, or in the Vedic system, prana. It's our life force. That informs our determination and our persistence. And finally, the capability are the skills and resources that we need and have to intentionally, effectively act. So the harmonizing of the alignment of these 3, when they're populated and aligned, from my perspective, create optimal intention, attention, energy, and skillful action. And by the way, just as a nod again to the to the positive psych model here at the bottom left under capability, we could look at this through the lens, for example, of the flow state dynamic, of the interaction of challenge and skills and how they interact. For example, to create incentives for us to act, to perform. I won't go further into that now, but those of you who are familiar with flow state theory and the model of flow state, we can look at skills and capability here through this lens. If we have only capability and will and no purpose, it leads essentially to unfocused action. If we have purpose, capability, and no will, it leads to unsustainable action. If we have purpose and will and no capability, it essentially leads to unskilled action. So all 3 of these pieces are necessary. And ideally, they are operating optimally, in this kind of Venn diagram in a balanced, harmonious way. So finally, just a quote from Dalai Lama, which I always use, always good to end. It's auspicious to end with, with a quote from from the Dalai Lama is open your arms to change, but please don't let go of your values. Okay, so let's talk.
That's great. And I think it's really interesting too, because to your point, there's the individual side, then there's the group side. So I imagine you can do these kind of layers across. So I have a question for everybody. So I think, is everyone taking their KVI? Sounds like just everybody here has, I believe. And then we sent out an email, which may have been lost a little bit in the translation, but did anyone do the homework before pick out your three? Okay, great. So here's what we're going to do. This is what we love to do with these groups. And if you haven't, it's okay. We're going to give you a chance to kind of catch up. We're about to jump into, Emily, we're in time for a breakout. Is that correct? Go ahead. Okay, Gunther, why don't you stop sharing and I'll go ahead and share my screen again.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a breakout, and this is a really good chance for everyone to really be part of the conversation. So what I'd ask you to do is, if you don't have your camera on and you can, this is a good time to turn it on, is just to make sure that everything's working. Great, thanks, Jennifer. And so what we'll do is two things. One is, by the way, there's a couple of folks that we've asked to kind of help facilitate some of these breakouts, because some of the dialogue there can be some questions. And so Zach, if you'd raise your hand, you may have Zach in your room. Mark, if you raise your hand, we may have Mark in the room. Obviously myself and Cody, and then depending on how many groups are we going to have?
We're going to have 5. So we'll have Brian also as a
Brian, can you raise your hand? Where's Brian? There he is. Brian's down there on mine. So Brian will also be a facilitator. So they're not really going to do anything other than just making sure that we're on time, that everyone gets a chance to speak. For this first breakout, we want 2 tasks. The first task is to do a quick introduction. Quick introduction of who you are, why you're here. Very, very kind of brief, just to say hello. Again, one of the key items here is to meet somebody new that's going to have impact in your life, in your work, in what you're doing. So that's the goal. The second thing is this is the conversation. And so the idea was, the homework was to pick out of your values that you've done, 3 of them, and how they work, how they inform or affect, or how you associate them with well-being and what that means. And then to have a chance to then describe that and to share that with a family member or a friend and get their feedback on how basically their interpretation of how well your values are and how you're living them. So that's really the discussion. So I think we'll have probably 4 or 5 minutes for each person. Go ahead, Gunther.
JP, let me just jump in here and say, please choose 3 of the most salient values on your top 10 list. Don't worry about whether they're control, relational, or developmental. Ignore that for the moment. We'll have a chance to go back and do some work with that after this event. But right now, just look at your list, kind of grok it, quiet your mind for a moment and pick the 3 that you feel are the most salient, the most important for you with respect to your understanding of how they're related or drive your sense of well-being.
Fantastic. Okay. Are we ready to go? Anything else, Gunther, or should we jump into the next session?
Let's jump. Let's go.
All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. The power of Zoom. So this is a time where we get to kind of come back, and we've got about 5 or 6 minutes. We'd love to hear from 2 or 3 of you, maybe a couple more if they're shorter, but just kind of hear back. What did you hear? What did you learn? What came up for you? Love to hear from each group if possible. Who wants to volunteer?
I'm happy to jump in, JP. It's Judy Cousin.
Hi, Judy.
One of the questions that came up in our group is, some of us observed, we had a chance to reflect on how many values do we have in common with the list of group values that Gunther shared. And we didn't really have too much of a chance to get going on that topic, but it made me wonder, in the same way that we see with research, for example, about board leadership, that gender diversity actually improves the performance of a board as relates to oversight of a company. It made me reflect and wonder if there is a benefit to value diversity on a team.
Let me respond to that. That's a very insightful and very important point. First of all, when I'm working with teams and groups, what I look at when I'm working with them individually and then in the group is to see what percentage of values an individual has that are mapped in the group. And generally I define alignment as having at least 3 or 4 values that are the same as the group's values. If they're 3 or 4 out of 10, I consider that to be a very good beginning point around looking at alignment and looking at some of the parameters that are needed in terms of the application. In terms of diversity, I often use the word I believe this is kind of post-gender, post-racial, post-ethnic, post almost every category you can think of. Diversity of values, to me, and worldviews is the most interesting and the most salient and the most powerful. So not everybody is ready for that conversation, nor need they be. But to me, that is the most interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I almost think the conversation around the same value, but what's the meaning of it? How does it apply? You know, what's the worldview on top of that meaning? If your meaning is family orientation, you know, does that mean on one side La Familia, or does it also mean on the other side, you know, yeah, right. So, you know, is it, you know, so it's so interesting to see how that comes up and how can it be preserved.
And to that point, for example, 2 people could have the value of family belonging. One might be a mafioso don, the other might be an ordinary bloke. They both value family, but their understanding and meaning and connotative understanding of that is going to be very different. Nevertheless, having an initial commonality around a shared value allows at least the possibility for an intervention, for an understanding, to build rapport, to build possibly a bridge. It's not a panacea, but it does provide a possibility.
Yeah, communication. Thanks, Judy. Anyone else? What else came up in the meetings?
Well, just in that context, I would add that people have been making really certain that we understand that Vladimir, as I call him, putrid, doesn't share the same core values with us, but we're trying to impose those values that we share from a democratic perspective on him, and then we try to predict his behavior based on a misunderstanding of his core values that are way different than our core values.
Well, thank you. But in this context, you know, we don't have time today, but the worldview that Putin is operating with is what I call an alien threatened worldview. And, you know, it's very distinct from, you know, from, I would say, basically from the the prevalent worldview of the United States at this time, which is more kind of self-actualizing worldview, if you will, or organizational worldview, late organizational or self-actualizing worldview. Those of you who are interested in this, you know, we can talk about this another time, but when worldviews collide, basically, there's very little communication when people are operating inside worldviews, and particularly from an alien threatened perspective, you know, it's the wagons are circled basically, and nobody can get in, basically.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, one more point of view, maybe from someone in the younger generations. I would love to hear from
Eric, Jason. That's you guys. I'm just calling it out for you.
Thanks, Cody. Love the shout out.
Thanks, Jason. Jump in.
Yeah, I was of the same group as Judy, but yeah, I'll definitely go ahead and just speak something that I found interesting. We talked a little bit about almost putting names to our values. A lot of us, or at least in my group, we kind of saw that, hey, I liked this value, and it kind of bleeds into what's going on in my life. Like for me, I'm a student, and so one of my highest values, in fact, it was 100%, was work. And I think that's because I called it a lot of different hats, but you know, I have my school hat, I have like my work hat, I have a whole bunch of other hats with all my different responsibilities. And I think the one that I have in common with each and every single one of those hats was being productive. I value the work, and I feel best when I'm working in a way with each of those hats. And so I kind of found that with each hat, there's different values, but some of them kind of all share similar things. And so I think that's almost like a core. I don't know if that's, you know, but if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So when you talk about core, I'll just ask this question, right? Like, did you find anything that was like unique to that core that like you didn't really expect? I mean, you obviously expected the work and the productivity, right? But is there something in there that just was totally a new lens to look through?
I can look over them real fast, but I didn't find necessarily anything that I was surprised at. I almost could look at each kind of value and kind of see like, yeah, I could kind of see where that comes from. I wasn't necessarily like super surprised at anything per se.
Well, it's awesome to have so many. Again, I love the difference of opinions, just people who are coming from. So let's jump into our next exercise, because I think it's actually you've actually led into a really interesting jumping off point, which is, let me go ahead and share these slides here. And Gunther, maybe after I set up the next exercise, you can walk us through a little bit of, give us a little bit of direction. But first of all, I wanted to kind of re-highlight in your KVIs, and hopefully everyone has those. You'll be able to see that tree image that Gunther showed earlier, that kind of takes your top values and puts them into foundational, focus, and vision, or I guess the other way, foundational, the roots, the focus, the trunk, the everyday, and the vision, which is kind of that future look. And the idea here is that the exercise we're going to go through is that Gunther wants you to kind of take one of each of those, choose maybe the one that's kind of really calling to you most. Again, these are exercises we're doing now here, but the idea, of course, is that you can do this with your group, with your team, with your family, with your employees, with your units, whatever, kind of extend it out further. Take one of those values and put it down. And then we want you to think about setting a very compelling value supported goal associated with that. Okay, that's going to be part one of this exercise. I'm going to give you a few minutes to accomplish this. And then secondly, in step 2, in just a minute, we're going to have you take that, and then, for example, the foundational value, and we're going to have you identify what are 3 action steps you can take towards that goal, towards that value goal. And then what are the capabilities or resources either you need or you have, or you can ask for? And then what are the obstacles? What are the things that are really stopping you from that today? And do that for also the value goal and the vision goal. Okay, so we'll give you 5 minutes, maybe 4 minutes to do that. Emily, you got my clock going, and we can put on some thinking music, but really take a minute to write these down, think about them from what you learned so far. And Gunther, maybe as they're doing that, give us a little coaching as we go.
Yeah, so if you could go back to the previous slide, just before this one. Yes, thank you. So I want to reiterate here the distinction, which I touched on earlier this evening, but let me revisit, because this is really important. Foundation values are the root system of the tree. They are associated with our early childhood experiences and our family of origin, and informative influences, particularly early in education, mentors, coaches, grandparents, or whatever it may be, things that have really influenced us. They provide, as a root system of tree, they provide nourishment and they provide stability. However, when they're challenged, for example, if the value of, I mentioned for myself, the value of design, pattern, order, before I learned how to deal with that, I used to kind of go into a contraction. If I couldn't grok a pattern in any kind of data set or working with people or whatever it might be, it all used to throw me into a contraction, and it prevented me from a kind of a free flowing energy. So what I needed to do is I needed to learn how to take my meditational background, my work in presencing, and apply it in a very concrete way to that particular dilemma. So that's the importance of foundation values. They're really central to have those kind of out of sight and out of mind in an intentional way is generally the right approach to this. If they're really rising into consciousness very strongly, it generally means they're being threatened or challenged, and they need to be dealt with. Focus values are the values that are associated with our day-to-day life. They're generally conscious. They're generally kind of no surprises about them. They're deployed with respect to our career, our jobs, or important relationships. And finally, the vision values are those that illustrate a kind of map of our personal and professional direction, where we're moving to. It's not like an exact prediction. They're more like kind of magnetic fields, or what's called in chaos theory, strange attractors that are drawing us into the future. So they're not aspirational in a pure sense. They're actual values in the empirical sense that I talked about earlier. They show up as measured here within this context, but they're insatiable in that by their very nature. For example, often the value of wisdom, for example, will show up as a vision value, and by its very nature, it's not a satiable value. It's open-ended from birth to death, so to speak. So anyway, I could say more, and I would just say simply this: there's an interesting dialogue between the foundation values and the vision values. When the foundation values are really being handled well, there's a much greater probability of being able to move towards and embody your vision values.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Gunther, here as we're finishing up
yeah.
this piece, any last thoughts about direction here, about when you're setting up an action steps? Maybe describe what do you mean by action steps?
Well, action steps are, for example, if I have a foundation value goal of, let's say, well, a common one that shows up is financial security. Okay, so if I have that, and particularly if it's being challenged right now in my life, so I want to look at it. What are the action steps I need to take? Well, I need to maybe make a personal budget. Okay, maybe I need to review, my income sources. Maybe I need to look at this is all kind of very straightforward stuff, but maybe I need to look at my margins. Okay, so whatever actions that come to mind intuitively or through internal reflection that will lead me to move towards the embodiment of that foundation value. And that, for example, the next column here would be what capability and sources do I currently have or need to do that? And then finally, what current obstacles are in my way? I don't want you to pay attention to potential obstacles because that's sort of like future think. Think about what's currently an obstacle, or maybe an obstacle, and maybe there isn't an obstacle. So I want you to do that for the foundation value, for the focus value, and the vision value, one of each of these categories. So this process of kind of the what I call the clarification or making these values concrete has to do with really embodying them. So they're not just sort of something that's abstract, but they're really living and alive for you. I think that wraps it up for what I have to say at the moment, unless there are any questions.
Last one, Gunther.
Go ahead.
What happens if you don't have a vision value?
Just for the exercise purposes, go to your top 10, and if none of them are vision, pretend one of them is a vision value. I mean, in a way, almost any of them could be considered. Some of them could be considered a vision value. It's something that you want to deepen, or make more use of. Okay.
One final question, because this has come up twice. It's in the chat and it came up in our discussion, Gunther. The folks are asking about the numbers that follow the values.
Okay.
Can you get a little color there so people have a little bit of insight? Yep.
Those numbers are what we call rank order percentages. They reflect the number of times you chose that value versus in terms of the number of times it was offered as one of 7 other values on the same page of the assessment. So if, for example, I chose design pattern order, every time it was presented to me, it's given a score of 100%. So it's called a rank order percentage. And then the top 10 are then you picked it like 4 times, 3 times, or 2 times. Generally, you had to pick it 4, 3, or 2 for it to show up in the top 10.
So don't pick the one that makes you look the shiniest. Feel free to go after the one that you're kind of struggling with and you're not sure, and say it and ask and see if you can get some feedback from the group.
By the way, just on that point, it's very interesting. Over the years, many people have asked me about, about this assessment, about whether people try to fake it or create a good impression. And generally, my response to that is it's not so easy to kind of fake this. It's almost like counting cards in Vegas. You kind of have to try to remember what you did before, and if you're going to present a coherent profile. Secondly, why bother? Why would you even want to do that? So I've been doing this about 20 years, and on the course of that time, I've only encountered very few instances where people were actually trying to fake it, if you will. And generally, it's reasonably obvious when I look at their values report, and if I see like kind of one from every category, then I kind of know they're kind of like averaging their results and trying to present a positive image by creating kind of a streamlined image over the course of all their values. And that's usually a giveaway that they're kind of, it's not real.
Bud, go ahead.
So a quick question. If we've got the foundation, focus, and vision categories covered, then on that first worksheet that you showed, there was how does it relate to our well-being category? Does everybody understand what that assignment is? How we move from our actual qualities and vision and values to the well-being piece?
I'm assuming, Bud, that's kind of baked in, that what we're looking at here overall in terms of the theme of this particular program tonight is well-being. That is kind of the generalized outcome.
Sure.
So everything is kind of looked at through that lens. So again, and thank you for reminding us of that. For example, so again, I would keep in mind with respect to your choice of the foundation, focus, and vision value, how it relates again to your own sense of well-being. Which foundation value do you may need attention, for example, with respect to your goal of a more embodied sense of well-being?
To add to the well-being.
Yes.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, I thought so, but I wanted to make sure that.
Now, if for example, if this were a completely different group and we were looking at, for example, creating a strategic plan, or maximizing our top or bottom line, or whatever it is we were doing, that particular outcome, objective, or goal would then be the filter through which we would look at, at the work in front of us. But that's not what we're about tonight.
Right. Got it.
Well, great. Let's do this. Let's jump in. And it's great. Brian, you had a question there as well. I think it's great because you're we don't have all the questions, we don't have the answers, but we have some good questions, right? And that's the idea here, is to explore and do that. So let's jump into some breakouts. Emily, are you all set with that? So same thing. We're going to give you guys plenty of time. I think we've got about another 20 minutes or so on the clock. Let's give every chance to have a conversation. Then we're going to come back and we'll have about 15 minutes to share back and ask questions to verify or get some more clarity from Gunther, and we'll wrap it up. So look forward to seeing you back here in about 20 minutes. And so I just realized we have somebody from Australia here.
Are you talking about me? Hi, everyone.
Welcome. And what time is it there?
Oh, it's fine. It's 10:47 in the morning now.
Oh, okay, you're right.
So
That's
it
right.
worked out perfectly.
Backwards. I just flew back, like I just said, I just had flown back from Europe, so it's actually like 3 a.m. for me, so it's okay. We're all good. We're all international.
Yeah.
So hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And so I'm hoping that was great. I would love to hear back, or maybe it wasn't great, but I'd love to hear what came up, what was a struggle, what was interesting, and we've got some good time. So someone jump in, and we'll keep these. If you have a question for Gunther, now's a good time as well. But what did you hear? What came up?
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm going to jump in here because I felt incredibly enlivened and enriched by our breakout. And I just want to give Jason a shout out for being like one of the young people that has restored my faith in humanity. And I know is going to be the driver forward. And it's, thanks a lot. It was really motivational. And I think one of the things that I think, I hope I'm not projecting here. So other people in my group, say if I missed the mark, but it seemed like all of us are grappling with, kind of post-COVID and maybe dealing with feelings of grief and loss. And, these things are coming up and how do we adjust? And then there's the war. And it's, this kind of constant shifting sand that is interfacing with the values and how to kind of navigate all of that in new ways. And, really the world is asking so much of us, both on a personal and a macro level. And everybody was a little bit different, but it seemed to me that was kind of a theme that was coming through, this kind of readjustment. And I felt very enriched and enlivened by being able to meet people that I would have never met and have a sense of commonality. For me, that was a very enriching experience. I really appreciated it.
Kim, thank you so much for sharing.
I'd also like to echo what Kim said. I was in a group with Eric and Brian, and I think it's quite easy to pinpoint what you'd like to work on, but then taking the next step to figure out how do you embody that? What steps do you take to get to that place? I hit some, I say like some brain blocks, but brainstorming with Eric and Brian was really, really helpful. They're both incredibly self-aware and knowledgeable people from completely different fields, but this community brought them together, and I feel really thankful to have been a part of it. So thanks everybody for being a part of this and for the organizers too.
Thanks for joining in. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think my biggest thing was seeing the specifics of what values are closely associated with your current sense of well-being. I think if all of us would have taken this, let's see, it's 2022, 2 years and 1 month ago, we may have a different value system that was included with it, as we probably would in 2 years from now. So this is a very interesting thing. And if any of us, I'm sure if all of us are here, we've taken a different values test, maybe not Gunther, sorry, but any other piece of information, I think it would be a really good kind of back and forth to see where that is.
Let me respond to that. Evan, generally I've found over the years, the 20 years or so I've been working with this, that people's values tend not to change that much. They do change, but particularly the foundation values tend not to change much. The focus and vision values can shift, but the foundation values tend to remain fairly stable until or unless there is a very powerful transformative event, like a pandemic, for example, right? It wasn't, I used to talk about and I still do, about the near-death experience, because that's sort of the most extreme. And then kind of next to that is the psychedelic experience, when it's really profound, where the very structure of the ego is basically, examined and kind of redefined, if you will. But certainly operating in a pandemic for 2.5 years now constitutes the kind of like a stressor that we've all been going through. So it certainly, that experience has certainly tested our foundation values very strongly. So,
yeah.
Something Naor said was about, did I pronounce your name correctly? Sorry.
Yes.
Right on. You were speaking so profoundly right at the bell to come back here. But something you said was that wisdom permeates everything. And that might be like a underlining value for all humanity, maybe. You didn't say it exactly that way, but it brings about alignment and really drives that present moment, that sense of present moment, the experience to be here now. And that you listen to that small voice, and you know what that small voice that leads you back to that place. I thought that was really powerful. And I feel like I would like to explore what wisdom means to me based off your expression of that in this last session. But I just want to say thank you for that, and agree with everybody else. Just being in this space with you all has been amazing.
Thank you for the shout out. It's amazing. And for repackaging it in a better way.
You know, I just want to mention, I mean, that is such a wonderful insight. And I'm trying to remember the name of the book, Practical Wisdom. That's what it is. Barry Schwartz wrote a book called Practical Wisdom. And he talks about values. And, you know, one of the things he talks about is how wisdom is kind of, I remember like the crown jewel. Because, you know, from an Aristotelian perspective, it allows us to we all have these values, right? Whether we lead with them or not, they are still there in some capacity in our lives, whether they are top or bottom. And wisdom is the value that helps us understand the golden mean, right? When do I put and how much do I put in, so on and so forth. So I love what you know, I wasn't in that room now, or I'm sorry, I wasn't. Although, by the way, I loved my room, so I take that back. I'm really happy with where I was, so thank you. But when you mentioned that, Matt, that just came to mind. So if you're curious about exploring that more, Practical Wisdom might be an interesting read. Yeah.
And so I'm curious about the group here, because what we're trying to do is, as you can kind of see, pull together some of our community and people who are new to community and explore values and see what happens when work happens. And I'm just curious, given your what you're currently at in your careers or your people or the people around you, does anyone have any thoughts about how to extend this? And we do have a little bit of post-event, you know, additional work for you to look at, but what if your entire organization went after this work and was able to have this kind of wisdom, and this was a vocabulary around the coffee table? I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about that?
I won't say anything about the value system, but I was speaking in our second breakout group of the bank that I serve. We are really, really focused on our staffing being like the communities that we serve. So in Athens, Clark County, we have a very diverse demographic. And so I need my staff to reflect that demographic. And again, going from this other side, I'm looking at us, I'm just looking at the faces that are here. There are 5, 10, 15, 1, 2. So potentially 17 out of 19 people that are here, or 22 people. Just trying to make sure that the demographic that we are envisioning and that we're working with is mirroring what we are seeing on a daily basis. And some of us may be different, but I love being able to see different communities being involved in different conversations that people are doing. So that's where the value system will work in, and we can get people ingratiated and included with that conversation. It's going to make our entire community a better community.
Yeah, I will add, I work for a nonprofit, and I think, Gunther, you mentioned this, that, you know, we claim to be a value-driven nonprofit organization, and we believe we are, but we've never really done the work like you presented here to identify where we have in common, and are we truly what we believe we are.
Yeah, we refer, I'm sure you've heard this term, we refer that to as like eating your own dog food, right? Like if you're going to say you are, you should practice it. Yeah,
you know, many years ago when I first started getting interested in values, coming out of a background, you know, my main wheelhouse professionally has been coaching and consulting for many years and working with many different organizations. Before I got deeply into the values work, I would do, you know, a half day or a day on values as part of let's say, a strategic planning initiative. And I'd walk out of that room after 3 hours with a flip chart with data that looked eerily similar from one organization to another, because they were all kind of, you know, politically correct mom and apple pie values. And I realized that most of the time people weren't getting at their actual values. They were dealing with either aspired values or values they deemed politically correct in that environment. That's what prompted me to go and actually research and then finally develop an empirical method including, buying and borrowing and stealing and licensing IP, basically to create a robust, empirically based assessment that could actually identify actual values versus the what I described in the presentation, the avowed values. So, organizations mostly they'll do this. They'll put it on an internal memo or an intranet or on a coffee cup, but that's the end of it. They don't actually work with it. And very few organizations up to now, there are some I've worked with because I tend to attract that kind of client, but very few over the years have actually taken this seriously enough to build it right into their performance appraisal system, to actually make it part of the fabric of their day-to-day work, where people are held accountable for living the values and demonstrating the values that they claim to be characteristic of the organization.
Gunther, something I want to, sorry.
One person who has done a lot of interesting work on this is Jim Collins, by the way. So
Out of Boulder, I will say.
Yeah.
I want to feed off on something that real quick, Gunther. It's just that, at least from my own personal experience and from my interns, they've kind of heard a lot of these things, but like when we start talking about the best way to change a space, right, that culture conversation comes up first, right? What are you going to set the tone? How is it going to be? In order to truly do that, I think, right, especially with the work I've done with you, Gunther, was to try and peel apart first which were my values and which were somebody else's. And so shedding those, I'll have a different set, but to your point, there's still some core ones that are part of my character. But by knowing those, then I can really re-enter into a conversation with the relationship, like a culture, where I can be honest with them, right? So it requires this work internally to be able to then accept some of these external conversations. And I think that's really one of those powerful things to consider, is that you may not necessarily agree with all these values. Maybe you do entirely, or maybe some of them are going to manipulate, but being able to work with them and focus on them over, months and months and years, I think you can start to peel apart that conversation, which allows you to be much more fantastically capable at those higher levels of integration.
Maybe time for one more. Anyone else want to? We have to kind of wrap up here shortly, but this is 2 hours goes quickly. Anyone else have anything to shout back from their time?
I'll just add that I want to mention how impressed I was when I hear these values. And we talked about this a little bit in some of the other groups I was in, but it's very clear that each of you is trying to harmonize with these in a goal to help something bigger, right? It's not that you're just focusing on your own well-being, even though that was challenged to you, your minds automatically went to this higher well-being of lifting the people around you. And I think that's something that's really at least important to this kind of beyond performance series, is that we're trying to say, like, performance is thinking about the 1%, right? But how can we lift that potential floor? How can we raise the floor of all of us 10%? And so, at least for me, it was really rewarding to hear how many of you are just, again, stretching yourself towards that goal immediately, because it has just become so synonymous with your own well-being.
Yeah, it's true. I'm always excited. Kim, you said it well. I get lit up and excited about all of your sharing and willingness to come in and bring your truth and trust those around you. So thank you for that. That's a big thank you. And as we say here at Black Lab, be great. But I really appreciate the time. Judy, thank you for being here. I can see you. It's late there. Appreciate everybody. Any final thoughts, Gunther, as we're walking us away?
No, just I want to indicate or express how grateful I am for the opportunity to work with all of you. This has been a really rich and rewarding session. My work leading up to it, the preparation has also been very rewarding. Working with Dan, offline a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, leading up to this.
Likewise.
So this has been a very, very rewarding and rich experience for me as well. And so I'm looking forward to see how we could continue this conversation.
And on that note, we are looking to continue it. You'll be on our email list now. If you're not already, we're starting another mastermind group. We're going to have other events coming up. We're thinking about doing one. We're trying to get a couple of really interesting speakers on sleep and the science of sleep and all the new information around the power and beyond performance of sleep. Speaking of, I need to go to sleep soon, but but no, but seriously, there's so many amazing native, interesting things are right in front of us. We don't have to look way far outside on technology. We can apply this new science or old science, new science to what we can potentially enable ourselves and the people around us to do today. So we're super excited about that and helping to propel humanity forward. So thanks everybody and have a wonderful night. Appreciate everybody being here.